Alors, rebonjour à toutes et
So
à tous.
welcome back to
Bienvenue à
each and
ceux
everyone,
qui peut-être se joignent maintenant à nous.
and also
Nous
welcome
sommes
if you
rendus
just
à la
joined us.
deuxième partie
We
de
are in the
notre
second
événement.
part of our event.
Bienvenue tout particulier à ceux qui nous arrivent
I would like
de
to
l'Atlantique,
welcome
Centre-L'Afrique ou d'Europe ou
to
encore
people who
de
may
l'Est
be quite
du
late
monde.
somewhere in the
Nous
world.
sommes
May they be
au
from
début de
Africa, Europe,
l'après-midi,
or
donc on
Asia.
reste encore un peu
Maybe in Asia, you're in the
en veille
morning.
pour ce qui est de Séoul,
Perhaps
mais
you are in the middle of the night.
de
We
la
have someone
République,
from
on va commencer un peu
Seoul
plus tard avec
who
vous
will
ce
be with
matin.
us a
Alors,
bit
merci d'être
later
là.
this
Je
afternoon.
vais
So
maintenant
thank you
céder
for
la
being
parole
with
à notre
us. And
animatrice,
now I will leave the
Véronique,
floor to our moderator. She will be the moderator for this afternoon.
Kate Taylor.
It
Elle
is
est
Kate
journaliste,
Taylor. She's a journalist.
conférencière,
She's
imprimée de
author,
Toronto et
critic
depuis
from
longtemps
Toronto.
rédactrice à la section art
She
du
has
Globe
written
and
for a
Mail
long
d'Ottawa.
time in the
Aujourd'hui,
art section of the Globe and Mail.
actuellement, le poste de critique de
And
l'art
at this
visuel.
moment, she
Elle écrit
is
également sur le
taking care of visual
cinéma, la
arts.
politique
She
et les
writes
droits
about
d'auteur,
cinema,
romans primés.
and she also wrote several
Kate,
novels.
thank
So,
you for
Kate,
being with
the
us.
floor is yours.
The floor is yours.
Merci Véronique et bonjour à tous. Très contente de me
Thank you
joindre.
very much. I'm happy to be here together.
I'll do my moderation in English because I'll be a lot more nimble in English than in French. So we're going to move on to the third panel for this afternoon, the third roundtable. And we're going to take a look at the issue of discoverability, the all-important issue of discoverability of national content, and also some of the legislative reforms that are underway, both on the African continent and then in Latin America. So we have 5 panelists, 3 from Africa, 2 from Latin America, and I'm going to give you very brief bio on each of them first. If you want longer bio, of course, it's in the program, and then we'll move on to the first panelist. Each of them has about 8 minutes to summarize for us the situation in their neck of the woods. And then we're hoping to have about 10 minutes for questions and answers at the end of their presentations. So our first panelist is Ojoma Ochaï, who's the managing partner for creative economy practice in the Co-Creation Hub in Lagos, Nigeria. Then we have Violet Maila, who's the project manager for the Music in Africa Foundation in Johannesburg, South Africa. Kodjo Noussouglo, who's the vice president for Africa of the International Federation of Coalitions for Cultural Diversity and the president of the Togolese Coalition. Anna Bizberge, who's professor of media policy and economics at the Universidad Nacional General San Martín and the Universidad de Buenos Aires in Argentina. And then we have Lucía Carreras, screenwriter and director, producer, president of the board of directors of Tinta Escritores Audiovisuales y Cinematográficos in Mexico. So those are our 5 panelists. And so we'll start with Ojoma, if you'd like to take it up. Do we have Ojoma? Is she unmuting herself? I saw her there earlier, so. See if I can get her on the chat here. Okay, so instead we'll turn to Violet, I think, who is ready to go. I hope, yes, there she is. I see Violet. Violet, do you want to unmute and go ahead first with your presentation? You're still muted there. I guess our panelists, maybe our technical person could help a bit here. Maybe our panelists are having troubles unmuting, are they? Yes, Violet's telling us she's not able to unmute. I'm wondering if Felix, whether you could unmute her. There she is. Okay, you're unmuted now, Violet. You want to speak?
Good evening from my side. Can everyone hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation on behalf of the Music in Africa Foundation. I am based in South Africa. It is 9:30 p.m. where I am, so not too late. And I'm really quite excited to be a part of this panel and talk a little bit about the initiatives that we have within the Music in Africa Foundation, as well as kind of discuss what our demands or perspective is around policies when it comes to the online environment. So the music, just to maybe give you a very brief intro of what we do as the Music in Africa Foundation, we exist to support African music across the continent through various ways. Our sort of primary way being through our online portal, which is the musicinafrica.net. And what that allows for is, one is a networking platform for musicians across the continent to connect not only amongst themselves, but also in general with sort of the bigger picture and the rest of the world. And then we also have a number of offline projects that live primarily to support the musicians, whether it's through just various projects that we do, as well as more specifically around capacity building, whether it is about increasing revenue for artists or learning new skills in the various projects that we do. One of the projects we focus on is called IBR, which is the Instrument Building and Repair Project, which is a project that focuses on teaching African musicians to build indigenous instruments and train people as to how to monetize on them. We have a project that's currently running that's actually supported by UNESCO and the IFCCD around revenue streams for African musicians. So looking at various ways that musicians can expand their revenue, but also
Sorry, Violet, you're now muted.
I dropped out there for a second.
Yes, you're back. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Keep going, persist.
Yes. So our project called Revenue Streams for African Musicians supports musicians in kind of how they find ways to monetize and expand their revenue, but also then looking at how policies could be changed to accommodate that environment and the kind of work that could be done there. So I'll talk a little bit into that because it speaks a lot into how then we are able to kind of really start to affect policy and how relevant this works within the online space. Because of COVID, it's been quite an interesting exercise for us with this particular project, because we had these grand plans to launch an online portal, which was amazing, and did an online research survey just to kind of get a sense of what these revenue streams are. And then with the aim to really look at doing workshops across the country and then creating usable tools online that artists can have access to. COVID threw us in the deep end, and we've really found ourselves having to move a lot of our activities online. So a lot of the research had to happen that way. A lot of that kind of information sharing had to happen online, etc. But really within the music sector, as a response also to COVID, the Music in Africa Foundation developed a program, because that's sort of what we do. That's the business of what we do, is to come up with ideas and projects that we really think can facilitate, can work for African musicians. We have a project that's called Music in Africa Live, which is a direct response to to what's COVID's done and creating a lack of live performance environment for musicians. So what we did is we created a grant funded by the Siemens Foundation to then offer grants to musicians around various elements, but all speaking to performance. So this was open to all African countries, musicians organizations could apply either for projects that are around capacity building to be streamed online, performances that were streamed online, as well as projects that support music and advocate for music. It's been quite an interesting environment in terms of seeing how, what the uptake is, secondly, what is allowed, if I could use that phrase, in terms of what people are viewing, in terms of getting rights for musicians to be able to utilize those platforms, to use them to be able to perform, and how they then monetize that element of it, because once things live online, they become that much more accessible. It's been quite interesting. Then what we've had to do is really strategically think and see how we find good partners that are able to support that space. So partners that allow for sort of pay-per-view kind of process for the beneficiaries, other big sort of other digital platforms that exist that would then partner with and would be willing to broadcast that information, not just for the sake of viewing, but to really grow an audience for these musicians as well. So it's been quite an interesting process. This is 2021 was the second iteration of the project of Music in Africa Live. And we now move into a space where we still have the opportunity to again look into putting out another call at a later stage this year. So it's a growing project and it's quite an interesting project. I think really for us, it's really important to be realistic about where we stand, because I think COVID gave us a new perspective and gave us a new playing field to look at. So for us, it's really interesting to start to think about how we as an organization start to speak to policies around this kind of online digital space, and how that is, how music becomes consumed now, how then the streaming platforms, the various streaming platforms then are able to support and really be profitable for artists. So these are things that we sort of sit with and operate in the background around how we start to influence those policies, how we create ideas and concepts and strategies that start to speak to that. And hopefully then be able to have a fundamental influence to a certain degree within the policies, not just in South Africa, but across the continent in general. So I'll stop there and we'll take any questions or hand over back to Kate.
Thank you so much, Violet. That was great. That was a great speedy summary of what you're doing in South Africa. And I'm sure there'll be questions at the end. I think we'll hold all the questions till the end. So we'll now try and go to Ojoma in Nigeria. We had a bad connection earlier, but we're hoping now she can join us. Ojoma, do you want to go ahead?
Hello, my name is Ojoma Ochaï. I'm the managing partner of the creative economy practice at CC Hub, which is an Africa-wide practice that is interested in stimulating innovation and technology application in the creative economies of Africa. We do this through a range of activities, including ecosystem development activities like meetups, networking events, and so on. We also do research looking at trends in technology, particularly as it relates to the creative economy. We also deliver a range of investment readiness activities, ranging from boot camps, tailored business advisory to creative enterprises, to incubators and accelerators, and so on. And then finally, we invest in companies that are using technology to capture more value from the creative economies on the continent, or address industry gaps using various emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, blockchain, and so on and so forth. I'm making this video to share the thoughts that I was going to share on the 27th of January event, focused on cultural expressions and diversity of cultural expressions in the digital environment. And I'm really looking at local content legislation with a focus on two countries on the continent of Africa, those two countries being Nigeria and South Africa. Before I jump into that, I thought I might share with you just a sense of the context of consumption of local content digitally, or content generally digitally on the continent. And I thought I'd start by sharing with you internet penetration. So the slide that you see on the screen is internet penetration in regions of Africa compared to the global average. You will see that Southern Africa is higher than the global average. Northern Africa is just above the global average, and Western, Eastern, and Middle or Central Africa are below the global average. The key thing to take away from here is, while we talk about a digital divide, which is true, the reality is overall about 50% or so of the continent are have access to the internet, and that's almost 500 million people. There was a study that was done by Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook, in 2019 or 2020. And of the people that they surveyed, 80% of them that were online said that they used their online connections to be entertained. And of this, 89% was video content. This shows you, of course, that it means that people in Africa are consuming a lot of content online. In Nigeria, honing in on specific legislation and legislative reform that has happened as a result of these changes and technological shifts. One such legislative review was of the Copyright Act, which was initially enacted in 1988. It has been reviewed multiple times until 2014. But in 2012, a process began to introduce digital environment considerations into the Copyright Act. And through that process, a new draft bill has been produced and will be presented to the National Assembly in Nigeria, or was presented in July 2021. Key things relating to online content in this Copyright Act really was about copyright infringement, liability of internet service providers, and issuance of takedown notices, and empowering the regulator to block access to infringing online content. In terms of the broadcasting code, which is really the legislation that has to do with local content, in Nigeria, the broadcasting code has had local content provisions since the early 2000s. But a 2020 amendment of that code for the first time made explicit provisions for online broadcast. However, there were a lot of shortcomings of that code. One, while it referred to web and online broadcast, it did not actually define what those meant, but it did provide for web and online broadcasting being subject to Nigerian registration or licensing, as well as sanctions relating to, for example, hate speech and so on. But it did not go as far as saying what those sanctions were. The 2020 draft code also specified the characteristics that content had to have for it to qualify as local content. And those characteristics involved the proportion of talent in the content, the location where it was produced, and so on. While it was a welcome development that the broadcasting code was taking into account web and online broadcast and local content within this, there was a lot of outcry as a result of that bill, because there was conflicting information coming out of the Broadcasting Commission about the validity of the document, but also there were complaints around whether it was hindering fair competition. And so for those reasons, the document has been voided, and we're expecting another broadcasting review code. But suffice it to say that Nigeria is moving in the direction of creating a broadcasting code that takes into account online broadcast as well as local content within that. Moving on to South Africa. In South Africa, there was a white paper published with public hearings in May and June of last year. And there were several provisions that related to audio and audiovisual content in the digital environment. And I highlight some of them on the slide. So the overarching theme of the white paper was plurality and diversity in the interest of public interest in an online context. There were new definitions for audio, audiovisual, and related terms, specifically for online distribution platforms. there was a new provision that video sharing platforms would be subject to licensing and sanctions, for example, around hate speech, similar to Nigeria. There was an extension of content quota to online platforms. Up to 30% of the video catalog would then be required to be South African, to be local content. There were provisions around language diversity. There were provisions around code of conduct for on-demand content, in addition to an existing code of conduct for broadcast content. There were various other provisions, broadly speaking, like the promotion of a digital skill system, enhancement of digital media literacy. That white paper is still under consideration in South Africa. The reaction to the white paper, though, has been a number of large technology companies, not unexpectedly, like Facebook and Netflix, have provided written submissions and concerns and recommendations as it relates to that white paper. Local organizations have also done the same. The National Association of Broadcasters and others have also provided written feedback on the white paper. And the key themes in the feedback were around protections for traditional broadcast institutions and fair competition between online and traditional broadcasters, definitions around linear versus non-linear broadcasting, and whether local content was in fact the way to go, with some of the respondents saying that incentives was a better approach to stimulate local content. So in a nutshell, what we're seeing is that many more African countries are considering legislation review relating to the digital environment. In addition to the ones I mentioned already, I know that Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, other countries are looking at legislation for the digital environment. It is still a very contentious issue. It does not yet seem to have a clear sense of resolution. And there is a sense, as I was doing the research for this, that it will be beneficial if there were global frameworks to assist ongoing debates and discourse around the issue. So that's what I was going to share. If you would like to get in touch with me, please do. I will send my email address along with this recording so that you can get in touch with me for some of the sources of this, or just to have a chat or talk about the intersection of technology and the creative industries in Africa. Thank you very much.
We'll go to Kodjo. Kodjo, do you want to give us your presentation now? That would be great. Thank you.
Bonjour. Donc, je suis
Hello,
Kodjo Noussouglo
my name is Kodjo Busilo from the Congolese Coalition for the Cultural Diversity. I'm interested in legislation about digital data in Africa. This digital data, there's influence of personal data. I will talk about Senegal, Togo, and Ivory Coast. In Senegal, we have a law from the year 2005 of the January 25th, 2008 on the personal data. And there's a code. There's a communications code that makes reference to the law of December 2018 regarding communications. In Benin Republic, there's a law, B09, regarding the personal data. And this law dates of April 27, 2009. In Ivory Coast, we have the law 2013-543 relative to the transactions, and there is the Togolese law that is slightly more recent, and that is also focusing on the data privacy. So we know that legislation, when it comes to um, personal data privacy in the Francophone space, and this is also done internationally. And this has been an international reunion in January 2019. And there have been resolutions. The resolutions were found in the report on the Francophone space. So this report was established on the base of ACES, of Monaco, France, Belgium, from Romania, Hungary, Catalonia, Benin, Canada, and Quebec. The report underlines that all the countries that have answered to the questionnaire have a law to protect personal data, and the law was updated recently or is being updated in order to adapt to the new reality, which is the spread of personal information. For instance, the use of social networks or the digitization of healthcare. All these legislation all have the same objective that we can summarize by the Swiss law that wants to enhance the managing and enhance the control that people have on their data. And we have to reinforce the competency and the power of authorities and spread penal sanction. The federal law on the personal data has been introduced in 2016 and in the same spirit. There is, in it, we find individual rights, transparency of information, communications, human rights, and there's the right of information, the right to data access, the right to rectify, the right to opposition, the right to seize justice, the right to be forgotten, the right of the portability of data. It has been, let's not forget that this notion is not unanimous. Inside the French, when we talk about Canada, Quebec, we have seen also that there is a divergence. Sometimes the entity is part of the. However, the notion of consent is unanimous in terms of data use. Just like Canada has said, the principle is difficult, and it's difficult to put in place at the time of megadata. We have to find new ways to enhance transparency. And no state want to define in the law how data users can have access to their own data. So every person can oppose the treatment of the personal data. The laws, however, must be more precise when it comes to the functioning and when it comes to personal data privacy. The origin, it has to, for, we have to confer to the individual. Personal data have to be treated. 5, obligation that are personal data, and 6, when it comes to non-respect of legislation and all the personal data privacy. When it comes to the legislation, many institutions or rules to protect the data and the control of the treatment. This is how, in Benin, we have put in place the National Condition of Information and the Freedom, which is called CNE. In Senegal, it's the Commission of Data, and it's ruled by the legislator. And there's a DP and CP. In Togo, the government specifies that a bill has been adopted to take advantage of the opportunities. And businesses this way can provide better services, and this is essential. It is essential that life of citizens, particularly their private data, may be protected. It is in this point of view that the law of 2019 of the October 14, 2019, we have the decree defines the organization, the function mode. This has been adopted by the council ministers in 2020. This instance allows the government to use the multiple services without worrying to be exploited. This creates a climate of trust between citizens and the service providers. They always treat the data differently in order to serve the customers. They protect the consumer, its life, by reassuring the control of it on the data. May that be from the time the data is collected to the treatment. Most countries in West Africa, the Francophone countries, have put a mechanism to protect personal data and to give access to digital content. It is interesting to see that every country is following its own rules. There is the CEDO of the West Africa community. They're part of it. And this regroups 15 countries. And they all share the same language, which is French. However, we have a long way to go to allow citizens, especially content creator, to enjoy the content. And we also have to remind ourselves there is no lack of trust when it comes to data collection. We have observed this in countries such like Togo. Sometimes there's some spyware that has been infected computers and mobile phones. So since then, people have been not so trusty. But since the law constrained, then everybody follows the rules. Just as it was said before, there's still a long way to go. There's still some debate regarding artificial intelligence, transfer of data, algorithm.
Kodjo, je vais vous interrompre
Kodjo,
là.
I'm sorry about. Yes, I will interrupt. So sorry, I said the most of what I had to say. Thank you very much, Kate. See you soon. Thank you very much on the update on this law. There's a long way to go.
Ojoma, now before we leave Africa, Ojoma, do you want to try first by opening your mic and seeing if we can hear you?
Can you guys hear me? Hi,
Yes.
everyone.
We can hear you. Do you want to try your camera or you want to feel be safer?
Oh, God. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I think I'll leave my camera off if that's okay. I was also going to share slides, which I won't do now because it's the internet is patchy. Apologies for that. So I'm going to be talking about legislative reforms in two countries in Africa, Nigeria and South Africa, as it relates to online local content. And I was going to start by just sharing some stats about internet penetration, first of all, so that you understand the sort of context in terms of the viewership. And so I had a chart, if I could share my screen, that's showing the sort of average internet penetration by region. In Southern Africa, it's about 62% penetration, which is the highest and higher than the global average. And Northern Africa is about the global average. West Africa is lower than the global average by about 10%. And then Eastern and Middle Africa come in at only about 25%. And of this population that are connected, research that conducted online youth audience are using their online connection for what they term entertainment. And of this 80%, 89% of them are saying that this entertainment is video content. So in terms of the usage and the consumption of, online content, it's very pervasive, right? It's people connecting through their mobiles and watching all kinds of content online. But for the purpose of this talk and the focus on Nigeria and South Africa, I wanted to highlight a number of legislation that is changing to take into account these modes of consumption. And the first regulatory review that I wanted to highlight is the review of the Nigeria Copyright Act, which was first established in 1998. Well, the current act was established in 1988. It has been reviewed multiple times. But in 2012, there was a process that was started to introduce specific considerations around digital elements and copyright in a digital context. This new section includes provisions relating to online content, including liability internet service providers for online infringement on their platforms. It also includes the sort of modalities for issuance of takedown notices in the case of copyright issues, and it empowers the regulator to block access to infringement. More relevant is the Broadcasting Code, which has had a local content provision since the early 2000s. But in 2020, there was an amendment of the Broadcasting Code to make explicit
Oh dear, we seem to have lost Ojoma, have we? Guess we'll see whether her bandwidth comes back up a bit or whether we're going to have to leave her there. No, she's dropped out. She's dropped out. I'm very
Non,
sorry.
cela a coupé, je suis bien désolé pour ça, mais on a tout simplement perdu la connexion. Alors, il faudra qu'on quitte l'Afrique maintenant et ensuite on pourra revenir vers Anna de l'Argentine. Et Anna, êtes-vous prête à parler? Pouvez-vous vous enlever votre sourdine? Oui, bonjour. Merci pour l'invitation à participer dans ce séminaire. Je vais partager mon écran pour ma présentation.
Should be down at the bottom there, is it?
I can find it. No.
Yes, there we go.
but I don't get to see my presentation here.
Oh,
Do you see? Do you see?
no, I see a blank screen and your files.
No. Let's try again.
Yeah, yeah, that share screen button at the bottom usually works.
Okay, I can't find the presentation.
If you should have the presentation open on your own.
I have it. I have it.
You
No,
do.
I have it.
And if you okay, there we go. An overview of debates and legislative reforms in Latin America. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
can you
that's
see it
correct.
too? Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll start again. Good afternoon and thanks for the invitation. I will present an overview of what is going on in Latin America. To start, we can argue that so far in Latin American region, there are emerging public discussions on the role of global audiovisual platforms, but so far very few countries have enacted regulatory measures to promote diversity of cultural expressions. It can be observed that from 2017 to 2019, there was a first wave of legislative reforms in Latin America, where most countries of the region amended their tax acts to extend VAT to digital services, including audiovisual service delivered over the internet. Then we have a second wave, especially since 2018, 2019, where we can see that there are debates and lots of projects that have emerged after European Audiovisual Service Directive was passed. I mean, here in Latin America, debates started earlier, but what I'm saying is that especially after the European Audiovisual Service Directive was passed, there were more projects under public discussion. All these projects that were presented in different countries of Latin America are mainly focused on three aspects. Of course, not just limited to these three, but they are mainly focused on contributions to national audiovisual funds, quotas, and discoverability. There are also proposals around tax benefits for audiovisual platforms to promote their investment in national content. In this slide, slide 3, there is a summary of the ongoing discussions and regulatory reforms already passed. I will briefly comment first on the cases of Paraguay and Colombia, which have undertaken legislative actions. Paraguay amended its film law in 2018 so that audiovisual platforms contribute to National Film Fund, which is called FONAP. However, so far it hasn't been implemented. In the case of Colombia, the ICT Ministry enacted in 2020 a decree which promotes prominence and discoverability of national works through the creation of a national section in the platform catalogs. But there are some obstacles with this decree because the decree neither established quotas nor enforcement rules for these criteria. I mean, criteria of prominence and discoverability. And the other problem is that the regulatory authority, the CRC, doesn't have powers to oversee what platforms do. Then, besides Colombia and Paraguay, we have another set of countries like Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico, where there are ongoing discussions, mostly related to quotas and contributions to audiovisual funds, but no rules have been implemented yet. Here in this panel, we have Lucía Carreras, who will discuss in depth the Mexican case. I will focus on Argentina and Brazil. In the case of Argentina, different projects were presented in Congress, but so far none of them has succeeded. They haven't passed the origin commission debates. These different projects attempt to reinstall and extend to audiovisual platforms the provisions of the audiovisual law that was enacted during Cristina Fernández de Kirchner administration in 2009. I mention reinstalled because the audiovisual law was passed during Cristina Kirchner administration and was regressively amended in 2015 during Mauricio Macri's administration. So most of these projects tend to restate provisions of audiovisual law that were that we have for broadcast and pay TV, and also extended to audiovisual platforms. In the case of Brazil, discussions initiated in 2015 during Dilma Rousseff administration, and these discussions took place at the same time as European process was taking place. Broad guidelines were presented in 2015 and then further developed in 2017. And these guidelines were a mix of what the European proposal said, as well as extension of provisions already contained in Conditional Access Service Act, which is the Pay TV Act in Brazil, extend that to platforms. But with the change of authorities, first Michel Temer and then Bolsonaro, the focus of discussions narrowed mainly to how to get platforms contribute to national audiovisual funds. There was a recommendation of the Audiovisual Council for the adoption of a hybrid model by which platforms could choose whether to make their contribution to audiovisual fund, which is called Condecine, based on the revenues in the country or by their size of their catalog. However, no official decision have been made yet, and discussions remain open. Currently, issues like classification of service, that is whether provision over the internet is audiovisual or information service, quotas and contributions are being discussed in different lines in Brazil. On the one hand, there are around 8 or 10 specific projects related to platforms that are being debated in Congress. And on the other hand, all these issues are being addressed, are being included in a possible amendment of the Pay TV Act of 2011. Finally, there is another line of discussion in the countries in Latin America that is related to tax benefits to attracting platforms to produce content through measures like tax reduction or cash rebate, among other measures, as you can see in this slide, with examples of Colombia, Uruguay, and Argentina. The problem is that there are some concerns and criticisms with these kind of initiatives, considering that they will just benefit platforms, big content producers, and large and well-established traditional media players. But these kind of initiatives is criticized because something that it will not contribute to promote independent and local producers. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to further discuss if you have comments or questions.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was fascinating, partly because from a Canadian perspective, of course, it's very familiar. We're having very, very similar conversations here in Canada. So maybe now we can turn to Lucía Carreras. Lucía, are you there? Are you ready? I'm trying to find you on my screen here.
Aquí estoy. Here.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hola a todos. Bueno, yo soy Lucía Carreras, soy mexicana, soy cineasta y les voy a hablar un poquito de la situación en México.
I'm a film producer, and I'll talk about the situation in Mexico. Cinema as a cultural product is right, and it means about it. It's our identity, so we have to remember this. In Mexico, the governments often forget this. cinema, the production of movies, is actually a sector which creates jobs. And we have a legislation since the 1990s, and it was really a success of the cinematic community to have such an act, because there are no laws in many other countries, especially in Central America. But it's a law which has had very few reforms since then. The cinematic community wants a modification, wants an update of this law. And of course, we're not even talking about platforms in those days yet. We want a law for AV so that we'll be able to integrate notions like online platforms. As has been said, one of the things we've managed to do in platforms is to impose a tax on platforms. It's the most we've managed to do so far. And of course, there was a tax, but there was also an increase of the rates for the users. Now, concerning the Cinema Act, we're currently struggling to have it updated because there's a lack of political will in Mexico to change it. Oh, there are all kinds of governments in Mexico, center, left, right. Without all these governments cannot change the law. There's no interest for these governments to change law. It's surprising in Mexico because independently of the political orientation of the parties, culture becomes just a currency for negotiations. But sometimes it's so unimportant that depending on the ruling party in the parliament, the budget for culture is usually negatively impacted. In Mexico, one of the elements which hurts us, which prevents us from having changes and obtaining a new Cinema Act, is actually the free trade agreement of the 1990s with the US, the NAFTA. And at that time, Mexico did not sign a cultural exception, did not have a clause to have an exception for cultural products. So movies became just another commodity in this trade agreement. And I remember when we negotiated this treaty with Canada and the US, and even now, up to now, despite all of our efforts of the cinematographic community to negotiate agreement, no government, neither left-wing governments or right-wing governments, has had the will to defend these cultural elements. So all of this leads to difficulties to move forward the Cinema Act, and it gives power to North American media corporations, well, especially in the US, who basically support the government. For example, Cinepolis, which is everywhere, and others who penetrate other political parties in Latin America. So it's clear that the law that we have is archaic. It does not see the consequences of what's going on, and there's very little respect for the national law. Even in 2020, well, we proposed to eliminate certain aspects of this. Well, there are certain commissions on culture. So because of this and because of the pandemic, the cinema community started to move again, and we wanted to have a dialogue to find mechanisms to make these commissions disappear. Otherwise, all of the production in the country would be actually destroyed, because without any funding, it's impossible to produce. So the pandemic gave us the possibility of, eliminated the possibility of gathering together and working together. The Mexican Academy of Arts and Sciences for the cinema convened the various sectors of the cinematographic community to work on these aspects, because actually we didn't want these commissions to disappear, because these commissions helped us to be able to produce in Mexico. So we proposed another mechanism to obtain grants. And this was to try to complete the role of these old commissions, but because of these special circumstances, these commissions, well, once again, the government used the pandemic as an excuse to avoid working on the new legislation, well, amendments to it anyway. And now, apparently, it's something which we will not be able to avoid anymore, and especially including the platforms. In the working groups we've had during these meetings, well, to propose amendments to the Cinema Act, well, we wanted to hear all the voices. There were representatives of producers, writers, schools and festivals, alternative spaces, creators also from native Aboriginal people, which is very important in Mexico, the LGBTQ community. So all the voices that we wanted to unite. And it was a very important moment for the country, because by gathering together and having working groups, various societies were legally constituted. For example, the Union of Writers for Cinema Writers. Well, I'm president of this, and we work for the author's rights and relationship with these large platforms. But if we come back to this Cinema Act, what we propose is that all the groups, we want that in this proposal, we want to come back to the starting point, this vision of the law. Well, we wanted to guarantee the rights of all creators and have a fair, level playing field on the platforms. And as Anna was saying, for quotas, so that based on the law, we wanted to establish an inclusive production with diversity, not just for the contents, but also as far as the voices that are being heard, and of protecting all of the state funding, because this is a very important point. Films are funded based on the public funds, but the platforms buy this as original content. They remove the patrimonial rights and the copyrights of the works. So what happens is that the state becomes a maquinadora, or a sweatshop for this type of production. Last year, we managed to, well, obtain certain modifications in the Cinema Act, and the National Institute of Cinematographic Arts. Well, around this law anyway, we had a discussion with the whole cinema community to be able to gather the voices of all. So the idea was to have a proposal that would come from everybody, and this would be presented to the various chambers of the government as a proposal, as an effort based on everybody. So it wasn't a perfect proposal, but we think that it's a progress because it takes into account all of the voices, a voice of inclusion and diversity, and which includes audiovisual as a right. It's not a law which is perfect, but we want all of the cinema rights to be respected. Now, this law is currently being debated, and currently there is a proposal on the law about energy, which obviously has a priority. So this is why the two chambers of the government are very busy with the debates about this law. And of course, the law on cinema kind of took the second place. But we hope to have a legal framework that will be modern, which will allow the production of movies and audiovisual production, and that there will be a fair space for all, that there won't be a competition that will be unfair, and that all creators will be able to have a worthy space in which they can work. So there, I gave you a general overview what is currently going on in Mexico concerning this.
Lucía, thank you so much. That was great. That was very interesting to hear. Wonderful to hear your passion, and also again some familiar stories for Canadians there, especially the challenge in getting alternative voices if it's a system dominated by offshore streaming services. So we're going to turn to questions now. There are two ways you can ask our panelists questions. One is you can put them the usual way, you can put them in the Q&A. Please put them in the Q&A, not the chat, so we keep them separate from the chat. We can answer questions there. And also, if you do want to speak, you can raise your hand and be recognized. If you click the raise hand icon, we will, I think our tech will be able to unmute you so you can speak. So anyway, throw us your questions to these very international panelists who have given such a great perspective from both Latin America and the African continent. I'm just going to open up there's a question here. This is in French, so I will read it.
Alors je vais le lire.
Okay, sorry. Before I read it,
Avant de lire.
I have to turn off my interpretations. I don't hear it as I speak. Okay, so en français, l'organisation de
The Mondiacult Organization in 2022 in Mexico next September, could it be a venue for cinematographic issues and media issues in Mexico?
Violet would like to answer that. So maybe we can, Violet, do you want to unmute yourself? And I imagine Lucía also has things to say about that.
Sorry, that was an error on my part to a question I was asked earlier. Sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay.
Ignore it.
Good. Okay, then Lucía, if you got that question translated into Spanish, could you answer it?
I didn't put the translation. Sorry, I thought you were gonna do it live. Can you tell me, because I didn't understand anything?
Sure. So in English, just a second.
Yeah, sure.
There's the Mondiacult in 2022 in Mexico next September, and could that be a forum for to discuss these issues for both film and media? Do you know about it?
No, I don't know the event, or I didn't understand it because it's in French.
Oh, okay. It sounds like a conference or an organization. It's called Mondiacult, MONDIACULT 2022.
Well, honestly, I don't know anything. Obviously, any space is a space to dialogue. But I think right now in Mexico, what our biggest space to dialogue is this government, the legislation cameras. They're doing open parliaments. So we're trying to keep going as a community to the parliaments to talk with the legislators, because honestly, they don't understand anything. So it's very important for us to make them understand what are we talking to. We did it a lot in 2020. We had a lot of open parliaments. I think the discussion right now is in that level, you know. Obviously, we put these topics in any space that we are, because it's important, and it's very scary when you're in these spaces and everybody talks in the world about the same kind of things. Like, you know, we are dealing with the same thing. So that's very important. I think recently I was in Ventana Sur, that it's an Argentinian thing, with a lot of writers from Latin America talking that we should do something regional to deal with this kind of things.
Sorry, we've got a Sorry, my apologies. We seem to be bedeviled by tech today. I cut out, and I'm in downtown Toronto. I should have okay internet, you'd think. Sorry, I was just going to say that we did have the particular conference we're referring to as the UNESCO International Conference Mondial Cult. It's a UNESCO conference hosted by Mexico.
Yeah, I just saw it. Thanks. Yeah, I think it's an important place to talk about this.
Yeah. As you were saying, one of the really the important things about this kind of gathering is that you start to recognize, oh, everyone else has this problem too, that this is not in any way limited to one country. And that we're all struggling with the same stuff. Violet was going to speak to that too. Violet, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe sort of publicly respond to something that Douglas had asked, which was that he kind of mentioned that it's appreciated to know that various initiatives are taking place for artists online to increase their income, but he'd asked what are the strategies set up by the South African government, for example, for recovery of moral rights of artists and their works. And I just wanted to quickly mention perhaps that there is the South African Copyright Act, which is currently under review, but there's some bodies from collection societies, for example, the Copyright Alliance, who are concerned that certain provisions in the bill, if it's passed into the law, disadvantage the creators. The Copyright Amendment Bill suggests that the users, so whether it is broadcasters or music services of copyright protected material, should enjoy the same kind of privileges as the creators, but it kind of to a certain degree starts to dilute potential one directional sort of revenue that artists have. So I just thought I'd just raise that and just put it out there that, you know, that bill sits in is currently under review and has been for a while, but again, everything seems to be so terribly delayed due to the pandemic.
Yes, I guess that's causing a problem with everyone in these discussions, that that things get pushed off. And we've certainly seen that in Canada with some of the legislative discussions and initiatives. So do we have any more questions? Otherwise, we'll take a brief break. I'm not seeing anyone raising their hand amongst the attendees. So I think what we'll do now is, and we seem to have answered the questions in the Q&A. Yeah, so I think what we'll do now, it's almost 3:30. So I think we'll take about a 5-minute break. So if we reconvene at 3:35, back here, and Véronique Gavremont, I think, has going to give us a brief presentation when we come back. So back here at 3:35. Thanks a lot.